Well, good morning to each one. I feel like my preparation was a little bit like my path up here. Took the road a little bit less traveled. I talked to John last week, and he asked me, he said, Anthony, do you know what you're going to share about next Sunday? And I said, I didn't want to commit. You don't want to leave the cat out of the bag. So I said, no. I said, well, I have a couple things I've been thinking about. I said, I'm trying to decide if I'm going to combine them or, two separate sermons. Well, it's good I didn't actually say because I'm not speaking on either of those things. In the end, I decided to speak on the subject of money. This is something I've been thinking about quite a bit over the past while. I'm going to focus on a specific aspect of it, and the base for my message was a result of listening to a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. If you have time, I would encourage you to read it. It's very thought-provoking, somewhat radical in some ways, and what he's addressing is the hurry that we live in our lives and the franticness of it, and he identifies why that is, and a lot of it comes back to basically supporting our extravagant lifestyle. And he talks about things like Sabbath, he talks about simplicity, and things like that. And when he addresses simplicity, he talks about money. And it's very, very interesting. Even before that, the past year, I've thought more about money than I probably have in my entire life over a period of time. I've had a lot of changes in my life. I went from being an employee to an employer, and I have a lot more control. I don't know if control may not be the right word, but I interact with my money quite a bit more. I have the position to manipulate it a little bit more than I used to. And sometimes I feel like I do not have enough control of it. And also, along with that, the navigating Marek's disease, and with medical care comes cost. And so I've had to look at these things a lot more than I ever have. It's been very, very good for me. And I'm not sure where all I'm going to come out on all of it. Sometimes I have more questions than answers. And but this idea of money isn't any item or verifiable record that is generally accepted as payment for goods and services, or the repayment of debts, such as taxes, in a particular country or social economic context. The primary functions which distinguish money are medium of exchange, a unit of account, or a store of value, and that is according to Wikipedia. Money, this medium of exchange, is central to our lives. Most of you are going to go out tomorrow and earn money. We work to earn money, and so in turn we can provide for our needs. Money is essential to survival. If you do not have it, it's very, very difficult to survive. You're then dependent upon others' ability to earn money and provide for you. Money is also the primary influence of our social hierarchy. Ashley spoke about hierarchy last Sunday, and it's basically the ranking system. And the money we have, or the lack thereof, directly impacts our position, our power, and our possessions. If you look into who are some of the most powerful people in the world, ironically, money has a very important part to play in that. And those that have no money have very, very little voice at all. This is not new for our time. It's part of history. If you go through history, we go through the Bible, and Money has always has this distinguishing factor. Along with that, because of the place that money has and this whole thing of how it ranks us, we have this tendency and this drive as mankind to accumulate money. Everyone in some way, shape, or form is chasing the dollar, except us. We're followers of Jesus. But I want to introduce an additional concept to accumulation. I want to introduce the concept of consumption. Consumption is the act of using a resource to satisfy current wants or needs. I'm going to suggest that our society has taken it beyond merely accumulating, but has created an insatiable appetite for consuming. If you look at history, or some historians, they say this began in the early 1900s. While it does seem that that is the case by some of the literature, I think if you look through history, in times of great wealth, consumerism skyrocketed. I was just thinking about Solomon. This is a terrible example, but he was so wealthy, but he somehow thought he needed, 300 wives? Like, really? Really, this just outrageous use of wealth. I stumbled upon this article, and it is adapted from a book written by an Australian writer and historian by the name of Carolyn Higgs. The author of the book is Collision Course: Endless Growth on a Finite Planet. I didn't read the book, so I'm not going to necessarily endorse it. And reading through this article, while it was very thought-provoking, there was some political leanings, I think, that was trying to be made in the article as well. But I thought it's a very, very interesting point. So I'm going to try to, it's 8 pages long, and I'm not going to read the entire thing. I tried to go through and highlight some things and try to give you sort of a overview of the article, and it is based on this idea of consuming. The notion of human beings The notion of human beings as consumers first took shape before World War I, but became commonplace in America in the 1920s. Consumption is now frequently seen as our principal role in the world. People, of course, have always consumed the necessities of life, food, shelter, clothing, and have always had to work to get them or have others work for them. But there was little economic motive for the increased consumption among the masses of people before the 20th century. Quite the reverse. Frugality and thrift are more appropriate to the situations where survival rations were not guaranteed. Attempts to promote new fashions harness the propulsive power of envy and boost sales multiplied in Britain in the late 18th century. Although the period after World War II is often identified as the beginning of the immense eruption of consummation across the industrialized world, the historian William Leach locates its roots, surprise, surprise, in the United States around the turn of the century. In the United States, existing shops were rapidly extending through the 1890s. Mail-order shopping surged, and the new century saw massive multi-story department stores covering millions of acres of selling space. Retail was already passing decisively from small shopkeepers to corporate giants who had access to investment bankers and drew on assembly line production of commodities. The traditional objective of making products for their self-evident usefulness was displaced by the goal of profit and the need for a machinery of enticement. The 1920s. After the Great War ended, U.S. production was more than 12 times greater in the 1920s than in 1860, while the population over the same period had increased by only a factor of 3, suggesting just how much additional wealth was theoretically available. The article goes on to talk about, with this increase of production, the 16 to 14-hour work weeks of the work days of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution was not as necessary anymore, and there was actually a trend for it to back off to more of a sustainable output, this reduction of hours. But they say the business of the day did not support this trajectory. They also say that because of, we had the wars that were contributing to this, and whenever war happens, production increases. During the World Wars, factories were turned into producing arms and munitions and equipment for the war, and in that sector of manufacturing exponentially increased. So at the end of the war, when the war was over, you had these very efficient, well-run assembly lines and these plants the production was no longer needed for the war. So business said, okay, how can we make this profitable in peace? It also says this was one of the greatest fears of the business world at that time, was this difference between production and consumer demand. Historian William Honeycutt, who examined mainstream press of the 1920s, along with the publication of corporations, business organizations, and government inquiries, found evidence that such fears were widespread in business circles during the 1920s. Victor Cutter, president of the United Fruit Company, exemplified the concern when he wrote in 1927 that the greatest economic problem of the day was the lack of consuming power in relation to the prodigious power of production. In his 1928 book, Propaganda, by Edward Bernays, one of the pioneers of public relations, of the public relations industry, put it this way: mass production is profitable only if its rhythm can be maintained. That is, if it can continue to sell its products in a steady or increased quantity. Today's supply must actively seek to create its corresponding demand and cannot afford to wait until the public asks for its product. It must maintain constant touch through advertising and propaganda to assure itself the continuous demand which alone will make its costly plant profitable. Edward Caldrick, an economist who advised corporations on their management and the industrial relations policies, called it the new economic gospel of consumption, in which workers, people for whom durable possessions had rarely been a possibility, could be educated in the new skill of consumption. Paul Mazur of Lehman Brothers in 1927 wrote in the Harvard Business Review, "We must shift America from a needs to a desires culture. People must be trained to desire, to want new things even before the old has been entirely consumed. We must shape a new mentality in America. Man's desire must overshadow his needs." That struck me in 1927. That is what the business leaders of the day were saying. After World War II was over, there was the first wave of consumerism. They say was short-lived. We had there's a lot of borrowing of money, and then we had the recession. But after World War II was over, consumer culture took off again. And Stuart Ewing, in his History of Public Relations Industry, saw the birth of commercial radio in 1921 as a vital tool in the great wave of debt-financed consumption in the 1920s, a privately owned utility pumping information and entertainment into people's homes. Shortly after that, this was also after World War II, the television came along. And once again, it was this great avenue into people's lives to continually put products in front of people and promote this appetite for things. Retail analyst Victor Lebow remarked in 1955, "Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and the use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, replaced, and discarded at an ever-accelerating rate." Thus, just as an immense effort was being devoted to persuade people to buy things that they did not actually need, manufacturers began the intentional design of inferior items, which came to be known as planned obsolescence. In his second major critique of the culture of consumption, The Wastemakers, Packard identified both functional obsolescence, in which the product wears out quickly, and psychological obsolescence, in which products are designed to become obsolete in the mind of the consumer even sooner than the components used to make them will fail. Keep in mind, this is 1955. Fast forward 70 years, 7 decades, and you arrive in 2023. I believe we're living in the reality of the consumption gospel. Here's a little bit of data to consider. The average American is exposed to between 4,000 and 10,000 ads per day. On average, Americans spend 28 minutes a day shopping online. On Amazon Marketplace, there are 350 million products. To give you a little bit of perspective how many that is, a typical brick and mortar Walmart has approximately 120,000 products. If you divide 350 million by 120,000, Amazon has the equivalent of 1,400 Walmarts. And that is Amazon alone. They estimate that there are 26.5 million e-commerce sites. 26.5 million. And the ironic thing is that it is all available on here. I can sit in the living room of my house in my recliner and shop the world. The world is my marketplace. I can find anything I ever want, think I want, or dream up. There's someone out here that is selling it to me. And I can get on here, and I can say, and as long as I'm willing to give the currency that they are requiring, they will ship it to my door. That is where that is the level of consumerism that we live in. The average American has 29, no, actually, let me back up. The average American has 19 pairs of shoes. And ironically, also $7,000 of credit card debt. I think they're directly connected. We live in a society that allows us to buy more than we can afford. Another fun fact is if the average American has $7,000 of credit card debt is typically directly tied to consumerism. That's like you're not buying houses and cars on credit cards. Typically, you're buying stuff to live on, hopefully, but stuff you probably don't need, like 19 pairs of shoes. The cost of this greed. The average credit card interest rate is 21%. So if you take 21% of $7,000 times the amount of people in the United States, if I remember correctly, it comes out, I think, to $210 billion. That's the cost that we are paying as a country to live beyond our means. America is addicted to consuming. It's not just the simple act of having, it's the act of getting. 96% of adults and 95% of teens admit that they participate in some form of retail therapy. More than a third of adults and teens said shopping made them feel better than working out. If you don't believe that, go shopping. And yet, the experts say that we are in the midst of a mental health crisis. We live among the most unhappy people in the world. They say that 2 out of every 10 people is currently suffering from depression. The gospel of consumption, which what does gospel mean? It means good news, right? Is categorically wrong. America is literally and figuratively stuffing itself to death. Consumption is the insidious cancer that is destroying our world, our society, and ultimately our souls. I believe it's really, really important for each one of us to realize that we are profoundly impacted by our culture and the messaging of our time. So how are we as followers of Jesus? How are we relating to this gospel of consumption? How are we to live in the world, but not of the world, in relation to consumption? How do we push back against the current of consumption? If we face 4,000 ads a day, and I hope that we're on the lower side of that, but I was thinking yesterday, I was studying on my computer, using my computer to study, and I was using Google and Bible Gateway and stuff like that, and the ads are intense. Like, they're continually popping up. And at X1 out, scroll to the bottom of the page, you scroll back up, you'll be there again, just flashing. One on the sidebar, just there, changing. It's just, if you don't believe it, just start counting. It's incredible the pressure and what we face. So what did Jesus teach? What's the gospel of the kingdom? And this is, as far as money goes and stuff like that, there's many aspects, many different things that Jesus taught. I'm just going to pick out one that I've been thinking about and share with some of the thought processes I've been thinking about in relation to consumption and the answers to that. how do we fight against that push and that wearing down and that convincing? I'm going to suggest that the answer or a antidote to consumerism is simply simple living. In Luke 12:14, Jesus said, actually, I'm going to turn to that because I don't have the full verse down here. Luke 12:14. This is the parable of the rich fool. And here at the beginning, there's someone in the crowd calls out to Jesus and says, "Hey, tell my brother to share the money. Dad left us money, he's not sharing. Tell him to split it with me." And he says, "Come on, man. Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you?" And then he says to them, "Take heed and beware of covetousness. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things that he possesses." A very simple verse, but with profound meaning. And because of the society we live in and the wealth that we have access to, and you couple that with the advertising and this push of consumption on our lives, it's hard to know, as a follower of Jesus, how do you know? How do we live this out? This belief, we talked about this, if you're what you believe directly impacts what you do, right? Do our actions exemplify this belief that what we have, our life does not consist of what we have? I believe that simple living is the gateway to peace and joy. 1 Timothy 6:8 says, "Having food and clothing, with these we shall be content." I'm going to add one more in there. Need shelter, right? I can't say that I'm content with those three things. If I'm honest, my actions don't always exemplify that belief. With stuff comes stress. Our children are prime examples of this. Have you ever seen a child that has a monopoly on the toys, and they have so many they can't play with them all, and someone else comes and they literally lay on top and hold them all in tight and just are absolutely stressed out of their mind that someone is going to take what they have. They have so much stuff they can't even enjoy it. And you're like, come on, man. You can only play with one. You can only play with one. You know, simple here. Just play with one. It's also ironic that whenever, maybe I'm not training my children right, but whenever you give your child a gift, whether it's birthdays or Christmas or anything like that, there's a certain amount of the anticipation is actually getting it. It's that consumption. They tear the paper off and they look at it and they put it aside and they dig through the bag, the box, make sure there's nothing else, and they're like, "Is there anything else?" You know, and I'm like, "You've missed the point. I bought you a nice toy, and you're just obsessed about having more." In 2021, the market size for the home organizing industry reached approximately $11.4 billion just to organize our stuff. I faced this the other day. I went and worked at a storage unit facility. I was supposed to put receptacles in the back of some of the units because I didn't realize this, but like people actually use storage units for work. Like these were bigger units, and like most of them had cars in. And these guys were in there tinkering on their cars. Some of them, well, they were just sitting there. But some of the other ones were just packed full of stuff. And I had to get to the back wall to put these receptacles in. And I literally had to climb up on top of people's stuff and like swim across the top and get to the back and then stack totes behind myself, wall myself in, work, and then stack them back up so I could get out. And it was like, wow, some people need a dumpster. And there was one older gentleman working in his unit. He was, when I first got there, he wasn't there, and so I was in these people's units, and these guys was on a Friday, so they would show up. After a bit, he pulled up, and he had a Crown Victoria, pulls up there. We were jamming out to some the country oldies, and he came in there and started just digging through his boxes of stuff. And he's like, man, I don't even know what I have here. What do I do with this? And he started putting a pile of stuff by the door and some tools and stuff like that. And after a bit, he's like, hey, I don't need this stuff. He's like, you can have it. You can take it with you. And he never turned down free stuff, right? So I said, all right, yeah, I'll take it. Anyway, he gave me this little Skil battery-powered screwdriver, worthless. Like, you cannot put a screw in with it. But I was like, you know what? I'll take it. I have some children that they would love it. And then he also gave me, this is the most worthless thing in the world, is a Black & Decker battery-powered tape measure. A worthless piece of junk. I will never, ever use it. But it is sitting on top of the freezer in my basement. And now I'm going to have to get rid of it because I will never use it. I am way too digital to sit there and just out the tape measure and then wind it back in. Sorry, I need that. Anyway, but this stuff, it literally weighs us down. And it creates this tension and stress in our lives because we don't know what to do with it. These storage units are full of things that people, after they fill their houses up, they have to put it somewhere else. And I guarantee you, in 90% of those things, people have no idea what's actually in them. Because they have these auctions for people that don't pay. And you can go and buy these storage units, and it's almost more of for some people, it's a hobby. They buy and they dig through and like, what if they forgot that they, had a collection of old coins in there, And some people score. Most people just, dispose of it for the people that didn't pay. I think it's really, really important for us to continually have before our mind this idea of living simply. First thing is live within our means. Live within our budget. Like what we can afford. That's just a start. Trust me, we can go much further than that, but that's a start. And to continually have before us the question of need versus want. What can I live without? What if we would live with that question in mind? What can I live without? Instead of what can I live with? I'd be curious. Go home. Walk through your house. Go up in the attic. You have stuff you don't need. I'm sure you do. I do. Create a habit. Instead of rationalizing why we need it, rationalize why you don't. I believe these are small steps that we can take to fight back against this push of consumerism. I'm not trying to guilt you guys into living in a mud hut and living off beans and rice. The place that you may have to answer this question may be different than mine. And John the other Sunday was talking, I can't remember the context of everything, but he made a comment about asking God to speak to us. And I believe that is essential. in fighting this fight. Ask God. If we ask God, God, where am I consuming beyond my need? I believe that God will show us. And then the hard part is then acting on that instruction from God and following through on it. It might be as simple as canceling Amazon Prime. It might be as simple as creating a budget, tracking your spending. Where's your money going? Because we have so much, the amount of money that we just waste is often unknown to us. Know where your money's going. Practice gratitude. Be thankful for what you have. Thanksgiving is coming up, and Christmas follows. I feel that's a little ironic. Christmas, I'm gonna bust you on Christmas a little bit. I grew up in a home where we didn't give gifts, so I have a platform. Later in life, my family now does gifts, but growing up, I didn't get a Christmas. I think I remember one or two Christmas gifts my entire growing up years. I remember my grandparents gave me $5. It was an event. Anyway, we have this. Christmas is frustrating in a way because what do? We have these, and I'm not take this with a grain of salt. We have these things we do. We pass names around, and then we have to buy these people gifts. And I don't know about you. Is there anyone here that loves buying gifts for someone else? Like the whole idea of buying gifts. I'm sure there's some of you here, you have the gift of gift giving. I am not one of those people. It is so frustrating to buy something for someone that has nothing they need. In the end, I think we're almost all in that boat. And so what do? You're like, well, they want this. Then you give a gift receipt so they can get, if they don't need it, they can take it back and get something else. Go to Walmart or any after Christmas, and literally the people that are there returning their gifts because they have too much, it's hysterical. It's hysterical. What if? What if instead of giving, just one year, I'm just going to throw this out there as a challenge. What if this year, we got gifts and we gave to people that actually need, just once? Your children are going to be okay. Probably good for them. You're going to be okay. And maybe you do the whole white elephant thing, gift exchange, where you get toilet paper and stuff like that. Then you're not missing out on much. So I'm just, I'm just going to leave that there. But just a thought. How can I live simply? What's the reason behind this, ultimately? In order to give extravagantly. I believe that is the heart of God. And as Christians, as followers of Jesus, we should be known for our contribution, not our consumption. There should be a marked difference between how we interact with our with the things we have access to, with our money, and so forth. Our goal should be to contribute more than we consume. In Acts 20:35 it says, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." In Corinthians 2 Corinthians 9, there's the verse that God loves a cheerful giver. And what has been said here, that cheerful, what's the idea behind cheerful? I think, John, you're the one that says, what's a cheerful giver? Another term for that. Hilarious. I'm going to read 2 Corinthians 9, 6 through 8. But this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a hilarious giver. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you, always having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work. As it is written, He has dispersed abroad, He has given to the poor. Our society is preaching and yelling at us that by obtaining and consuming, we will be happy. And yet they refuse to acknowledge the fact that if we're honest and face the reality of our world and our culture, it is completely false. But Jesus says, give to find joy. Find contentment. Be grateful for what you have. And in the end, we need to remember that this is not just depriving ourselves of what is ours. This is not a difficult thing. It is. But I often think of the verse where it says, His yoke is easy and His burden is light. The way of Jesus is the way to life. And the thing that everyone is chasing is this abundant life that Jesus has promised. It is there. It is available. But it is all within the boundaries that God has set up for us. So my encouragement to you is, yes, it may be hard to curtail some aspect of your life where you may be being extravagant. You know, it may be hard to go from 19 shoes to 18. But these small steps that we can take, and that this becomes a lifestyle, that we continually pursue living a simple life, that we have the capacity to take what God has given us and be able to share with others in the greatest way possible. That's why we're here. Because in the end, we're just stewards. Everything we have is God's. But He gives us the responsibility of managing it. And so as we have these resources, and we face the barrage of the call to spend these resources in these areas, let's remember, it's God's. Let's take care of what the supplier needs. Food, shelter, clothing. And then everything we have left over, let's give it away. And in that, we will experience, I'm convinced of this, fullness of joy.